So, what is the Meno about, and why are we reading it? First, let me suggest that in your reading, and certainly in my talks about the Meno, I'm thinking, and maybe perhaps just to begin with, you can think of the Meno as consisting of three sections. The first section, starting at the beginning, on my edition it's page 3. I don't know, I think we have the same translation, but I'm not sure we have the same page numbers. So I'll be using what are called Stephanus numbers, which are the numbers and letters in the margin of the text. The Meno begins at Stephanus number 70, and then underneath you'll see letters that mark areas of the page. So the first section runs from 70, should be, I guess, 70A, to 80D, which in my edition is on page 13. That's really the first section, from the beginning to 80D. The second section, which is highlighted by Socrates' supposed demonstration of his theory of knowledge as recollection, again begins at about 80D and continues through that demonstration to about 86C, 86D area there. That's really section 2. Section 3, I would say, of the dialogue begins again there on page 20, Stephanus number 86D, to the end of the dialogue. I think that we'll take it in those three sections, which seem each of them to be kind of different dramatically or philosophically. So what is this dialogue about? Why are we reading it? Well, of course it's about virtue, and we'll be talking a lot about the Greek concept of virtue, as there'll be explanatory notes about that word. We translate it as virtue. The original word in Greek is arete. It's a very strange history of our translating of that word, because of course we are translating it as virtue, which is a fine translation. There are other translations of arete. Excellence, or human excellence, being a good supplement to virtue. But of course the word virtue is derived from Latin. So we really have an English word based upon a Latin word, which is a translation of an earlier Greek word, and it gets a little complicated, especially if we think about the root meaning of, or the etymology of the word virtue, and maybe you should look that up. It's rather interesting, but the dialogue is certainly about what virtue is, and it's an example of two men who are certainly coming from different places, Socrates and Meno, with two men together asking the question, what is virtue? Now, of course, this is not a course in ethics, so why are we reading a treatise or a dialogue, an investigation into the nature of virtue? Well, the Meno, of course, is more than an investigation into virtue. It's, you might say, through the investigation into virtue, or the inquiry into virtue, it also becomes an inquiry into inquiry itself. Because through the asking of the question, what is virtue, and the discovery of the difficulties involved in coming up with a cogent answer to the question, certain problems are raised, which are of wide-ranging significance when we're thinking about the possibilities of philosophical inquiry. And so different issues get raised that perhaps transcend the particular issue of virtue and apply to all inquiry into just about anything. And some really troubling possibilities in terms of the prospects of not only asking the question about virtue, what it is, but of asking about anything at all. So what is this dialogue about? I mean, that's for you to decide. I would say, having looked at it again and thought about it, and asked myself, what is Plato really asking, and what problem is he addressing here? You might say that the real problem in the Meno is to give an account of how a human being who starts in a state of ignorance makes the transition to being in a state of knowledge. How is it that we come to know anything presumably starting without knowing that thing at all. Not only is that a major theme of the Meno, not only is that a major theme of this work, you might say that it's a major theme of this course. And what we're really asking is, how is it that we come to know anything in this world, and all the related questions that go along with that. How do I know that I know? What is the difference between ignorance and knowledge? Are there different forms of knowledge? Is there something called opinion, which is different from knowledge but somewhat related to it? Questions like that are raised by the Meno. It's why we're starting with the Meno. And certain answers are given within the dialogue, that's for sure. Now, how satisfied we ultimately are with those answers is another question. But I would say that the main value of the Meno, reading Plato's Meno, reading this dialogue between these two men that Plato came up with, is that it points out certain difficulties, it raises certain questions, and it gets us thinking in certain areas about the presuppositions, perhaps, that we make in everyday life, and realizing the questionability of those presuppositions and urging us to think more about them and coming up with solutions.